Castle by Franz Kafka. Chapter 11. I am your narrator. He reached the school chilled through and through. It was quite dark. The candles in the lanterns had burned down. Led by the assistants who already knew their way here, he felt his road into one of the classrooms. Your first praiseworthy service, he said, remembering Clam's letter. Still half asleep, Frieda cried out from a corner. Let Kay sleep. Don't disturb him. So entirely did Kay occupy her thoughts, even though she had become so overcome with sleep that she had not been able to wait up for him. Now a light was got, but the lamp could not be turned up very far, for there was only a little paraffin left. The new household was still without many necessaries. The room had been heated, it was true, but it was a large one, sometimes used as the gymnasium. The gymnastics apparatus was standing about and hanging from the ceiling, and it had already used up all the supply of wood. Had been very warm and cozy too, as Kay was assured, but unfortunately had grown quite cold again. There was, however, a large supply of wood in a shed, but the shed was locked and the teacher had the key. He only allowed this wood to be used for heating the school during teaching hours. The room could have been endured if there had been beds where one might have taken refuge. But in that line there was nothing but one sack stuffed with straw, covered with praiseworthy tidiness by a woolen rug of Frieda's, but with no feather bed and only two rough, stiff blankets which hardly served to keep one warm. And it was precisely at this wretched sack of straw that the assistants were staring greedily, but of course, without any hope of ever being allowed to lie on it. Frieda looked anxiously at Kay. That she knew how to make a room, even the most wretched, habitable, she had proved in the bridge inn. But here she had not been able to make any headway, quite without means as she was. Only ornaments are the gymnastic contraptions, she said, trying to smile through her tears. But for the chief deficiencies, the lack of sleeping accommodation and fuel, she promised absolutely to find help the very next day and begged Kay only to be patient till then. From no word, no hint, no sign could one have concluded that she harbored even the slightest trace of bitterness against Kay in her heart, although, as he had to admit himself, he had torn her away first from the Herrenhof and now from the Bridge Inn as well. So in return, Kay did his best to find everything tolerable, which was not difficult for him. Indeed, because in thought he was still with Barnabas, repeating his message word for word. Not, however, as he had given it to Barnabas, but as he thought it would sound before Clam. After all, however, he was very sincerely glad of the coffee which Frieda had boiled for him on a spirit burner, and leaning against the almost cold stove, followed the nimble, practiced movements with which she spread the indispensable white table cover on the teacher's table, brought out a floured cup, then some bread and sausage, and actually a box of sardines. Now, everything was ready. Frieda too had not eaten yet, but had waited for Kay. 2 chairs were available. There Kay and Frieda sat down to their table. The assistants at their feet on the dais. But they could never stay quiet. Even while eating, they made a disturbance. Although they had received an ample store of everything and were not yet nearly finished with it, they got up from time to time to make sure whether there was still anything on the table and they could still expect something for themselves. Kay paid no attention to them and only began to take notice when Frieda laughed at them. He covered her hand with his tenderly and asked why she was so indulgent to them and treated even their naughtiness so kindly. In this way, one would never get rid of them, while through a certain degree of severity, which besides was demanded by their behavior, one could manage either to curb them or, what was both more probable and more desirable, to make their position so hot for them that they would have finally to leave. The school here didn't seem to be a very pleasant place to live in for long. Well, it wouldn't last very long in any case, but they would hardly notice all the drawbacks if the assistants were gone and they too had the quiet house to themselves. And she didn't notice too that the assistants were becoming more impudent every day, as if they were actually encouraged now by Frieda's presence and the hope that Kay wouldn't treat them with such firmness as he would have done in other circumstances. Besides, there were probably quite simple means of getting rid of them at once, without ceremony. Perhaps Frieda herself knew of these, seeing that she was so well acquainted with all the circumstances. And from all appearances, one would only be doing the assistants a favor if one got rid of them in some way. For the advantage they got by staying here couldn't be great. And besides, the lazy spells which they must have enjoyed till now must cease here, to a certain extent at any rate. For they would have to work while Frieda spared herself after the excitements of the last few days, and he, Kay, was occupied in finding a way out of their painful situation. All the same, if the assistants should go away, he would be so relieved that he felt he could quite easily carry out all the schoolwork in addition to his other duties.